Nearly half a century after two 15-year-old girls were murdered in the sandhills above Wanda Beach, police found something the original detectives could never have used: a weak male DNA profile on one victim's clothing. Then came the harder discovery: a separate semen sample, recorded in the old forensic files and potentially capable of identifying the attacker, could no longer be found. That missing sample is now part of the case itself. It sits beside a 34-meter drag mark in the sand, an unidentified young man seen near the girls, thousands of interviews, several notorious suspects, and a promise made by the detective in charge in January 1965. He believed they would eventually catch the man responsible. They never did. The murders of Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock remain officially unsolved. No one has been charged. Recent investigators and journalists have focused on one serial predator more than any other, yet the surviving file has never placed him at Wanda. The case still runs along a physical route, from the train out of West Ryde to the rocks at Cronulla, into the dunes, along the marks left by a girl who tried to escape, and finally into an evidence system that preserved enough to reopen the question, but not enough to attach a provable name. Marianne and Christine lived next door to each other in West Ryde, in Sydney's northwest. They were the same age and became close friends. Marianne had come to Australia from West Germany with her family as a child. Her father, Helmut Schmidt, later developed Hodgkin's disease and died in 1964. With her mother unwell and a large family at home, Marianne helped care for her younger brothers and sister. Christine had also lost her father when she was young. She lived with her grandparents and other relatives nearby. Family members later remembered her as quiet and sweet. The photographs that remain show two teenagers on the edge of adulthood, dressed neatly, leaning into the ordinary closeness of a friendship that had formed across a garden fence. The beach was not unfamiliar to them. The Schmidt family had visited Cronulla before, and Marianne and Christine had been there earlier in January 1965. On Sunday, January 10, they intended to take 4 of Marianne's younger siblings to the beach, but rain stopped the trip. The following morning, Monday, January 11, the weather had cleared enough for them to try again. At about 8 in the morning, Marianne and Christine left West Ryde with Peter, Norbert, Trixie, and Wolfgang Schmidt. They traveled by train, changing at Redfern before reaching Cronulla. It was a long trip for a group of children and teenagers, but in 1965, a public transport journey to a familiar beach did not seem extraordinary. Cronulla did not greet them with a calm summer day. The wind was strong and swimming conditions were poor. The main beach was closed. The group moved south and sheltered near rocks, where they ate and tried to make a day of it. Wolfgang still wanted to enter the water, so Marianne took him to a shallow area and stayed with him. At some point, Christine left the group alone for a short period. Exactly where she went and whom she met have never been established. Her autopsy later indicated that she had consumed a small amount of alcohol and eaten food different from the picnic shared by the others. Something happened during her absence, but the findings could not distinguish among the possibilities. She might have bought food, spoken to someone, or accepted a drink. It was a short interval, yet it may have contained the first contact that mattered. Wolfgang also noticed a young man in the area. Over the years, accounts of the boy's description varied in detail, partly because the witness was a child. He was remembered as a surfy-type youth, possibly in his late teens, with light or sandy hair and a tanned appearance. Some versions included a fishing knife, a homemade spear gun, or both. The differences weakened the precision of the description, but not its importance. A young man was seen near the group before Marianne and Christine disappeared into the dunes. After Christine returned, the children began walking north through the sandhills behind Wanda Beach. The landscape there could change quickly from public to isolated. From the shoreline, the dunes looked open. Once inside them, ridges of sand could block the view of the surf club, the road, and anyone nearby. At around 1 o'clock, about 400 meters beyond the Wanda Surf Club, the younger children complained about the wind and the walk. Marianne told them to wait behind a dune. She said she and Christine would return to the rocks where they had left their bags, then come back for the children so the group could go home. Instead of turning south toward the bags, the two girls continued north. Peter called after them that they were going the wrong way. The girls laughed and kept walking. That moment suggests the plan changed after the children stopped. The girls may have wanted a brief walk, arranged to meet someone, or noticed a person farther ahead. None of the younger children saw them being forced away. Whatever drew Marianne and Christine deeper into the sandhills did not appear dangerous at first. The last widely accepted independent sighting came from local fireman Dennis Dostine, who was walking in the area with his young son. At about 12:45 or shortly afterward, he saw two teenage girls several hundred meters north of the surf club. They appeared to be moving quickly. One of them repeatedly looked behind her, as if checking whether someone was following. Dostine did not see anyone behind them. The sighting divides the final minutes in two. The girls seemed to have entered the dunes of their own accord, but one of them was soon looking back as they hurried north. Any follower could have been concealed by distance and the sand ridges. Dostine saw the unease, not the person who caused it. The four younger children waited where Marianne had left them. An hour passed, then another. They had no adult with them, no mobile phone, and no way to know what had happened beyond the dunes. By late afternoon, they finally abandoned the waiting place, returned south, and collected the bags. Marianne's and Christine's purses were still there. That detail argued against a planned disappearance. The girls had not taken the belongings they would need to travel far. Their younger siblings had been left expecting them to return. The children made their way back to Cronulla station and traveled home without them, arriving in West Ryde at about 8 that evening. The alarm was raised quickly. Christine's grandmother reported the girls missing at around 8:30 p.m. Family members already understood that Marianne would not simply leave four younger children waiting on a beach and fail to return home. The search began in darkness, with the basic question still open. Were the girls lost, injured, hiding from the weather, or with someone they knew? By the next morning, that uncertainty was gone. On Tuesday, January 12, a man named Peter Schmidt was walking through the Wanda sandhills with three young nephews. In the sand, he saw what, at first, looked like part of a shop mannequin. He brushed sand away from the head and realized he was looking at a human body. Police were called from the surf club. When investigators examined the shallow burial, they discovered that there were two victims, positioned close together and partly covered with sand. Marianne lay on her side. Christine was face down nearby. The scene showed more than a single sudden blow followed by concealment. Marianne's throat had been deeply cut, and she had also been stabbed. Christine had suffered a severe blow to the back of the head that fractured her skull, and had been stabbed repeatedly. Contemporary and later accounts commonly describe 6 stab wounds to Marianne and 14 to Christine, although family recollections have sometimes suggested even greater violence. Whatever the exact count recorded in different accounts, both girls were killed with a knife, and Christine was also struck with a blunt object. There was evidence of a sexual attack. Their clothing had been disturbed, underwear had been cut, and semen was recovered from clothing or forensic samples associated with the scene. Pathology did not establish completed penetrative rape, but it did establish that sexual violence formed part of the assault. The attacker also left biological material that, decades later, might have carried his identity. The sand recorded one more sequence. A drag mark extended for roughly 34 meters from the main scene. Investigators believed Christine had run from the attacker, been caught and incapacitated, then dragged back toward Marianne. Scratch marks on the girls' faces were consistent with struggle and contact with the sand or vegetation. The trail made the order of events impossible to reconstruct with certainty, but it indicated pursuit. One girl had gained distance. The attacker had followed her and brought her back. The offender had managed to control 2 victims in open terrain, probably through surprise, a weapon, or both. One plausible order is that Marianne was attacked first and Christine ran, though the scene could not settle every movement. The younger children were nearby but hidden from view by the dunes. After the chase and the killings, the attacker still remained long enough to pull sand over the bodies. Police searched for 2 missing weapons, a long knife and a blunt instrument. Officers and searchers combed the dunes and sifted tons of sand. A blood-stained knife blade was among the items recovered, but investigators could not connect it to the murders. No confirmed murder weapon emerged. The crime scene was sand, open to wind, visitors, and the movement of the dunes themselves. Even so, investigators recorded the position of the bodies, the drag mark, clothing, biological stains, and impressions in the ground. The attacker had left traces. In 1965, those traces could describe parts of the assault far more readily than they could identify the man who committed it. Detective Inspector Haynes led the murder inquiry. In an archived interview recorded only weeks after the killings, he described the offender as a compulsive sexual killer and warned that the man might attack again. Asked whether police would catch him, Haynes answered with confidence that they eventually would. The scale of the response explains that confidence. Police appealed publicly for witnesses. They attempted to identify everyone who had been in the Wanda and Cronulla area. They collected descriptions of men seen near the beach, questioned known sexual offenders, and followed reports from across New South Wales. By the coronial proceedings in April 1966, around 7,000 people had been interviewed. At the time, it was described as the largest murder investigation in Australian history. The inquiry also had to work with witnesses whose information was valuable but fragile. Marianne's younger siblings had been at the beach, but they were children. Wolfgang's description of the young Surfie became central, although details shifted in later retellings. Dennis Dostine saw the girls hurrying but did not see their pursuer. Other people observed men in the broader area who were never conclusively identified. Police produced a composite of the young man they wanted to locate. It became one of the case's most recognizable images: a narrow face, light hair, and the general appearance of a beach-going teenager. But the face had been built from a child's memory, filtered through police questions and an artist's interpretation. Decades later, photographs of known offenders would be set beside it. Some looked close enough to send detectives back into old files. The image could help narrow a search. It could not supply a date, a journey, or a physical link to Wanda. The funerals of Marianne and Christine were held on January 20. Their families had to grieve while newspapers printed details of the search and the violence. Television and mass reporting carried the girls' faces, and the dunes where they died, into homes across Australia. Wanda Beach was no longer only a summer destination. For many families, it became the place where 2 ordinary teenagers had disappeared in daylight and never come back. The publicity brought leads, along with mistaken sightings, private theories, and men identified largely through resemblance. Detectives had to test all of it against the route, the injuries, and the known times. The reward announced in 1965 was £10,000, later converted to 20,000 Australian dollars. Remarkably, the official amount remained at $20,000 60 years later, even as other modern cold case rewards rose into the hundreds of thousands or beyond. The coroner found that Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock had been murdered by a person or persons unknown. The inquest could describe the route and the injuries. It could not identify the offender. Over the following decades, Wanda resurfaced through 4 very different leads: an abstract painting, a convicted offender whose established crime took place on a beach, a predator whose record began before 1965, and an old photograph compared with the identikit. Each sent detectives, journalists, or both back through old records. None reached the girls' route on that Monday afternoon. Alan Raymond Bassett's name came from an abstract painting. Bassett had been convicted of the rape and murder of Carolyn Orphan after a 1966 killing south of Sydney, so police had reason to examine him. Former detective Sec Johnson later became convinced that shapes in one of Bassett's paintings represented details from Wanda: blood trails, a broken blade, and the outline of a victim. Johnson believed those shapes matched features of the crime scene that had not been widely published. He spent years comparing the canvas with the Wanda file and also linked Bassett, in his own investigation, to other unsolved killings. Other experienced detectives did not accept the interpretation. Once the crime was known, viewers could map abstract shapes onto details already in their minds. The canvas carried no date or location, and nothing recovered at Wanda linked Bassett to the scene. He later volunteered a DNA sample, but authorities announced no conclusive match. Derek Percy drew attention for a more concrete reason. His detention followed the 1969 murder of a child on a beach. Percy was imprisoned after the 1969 murder of 12-year-old Yvonne Tuhai on a beach in Victoria. He was found unfit to plead because of mental illness and held indefinitely. Over the years, investigators examined him in connection with several disappearances and murders of children in Victoria, New South Wales, and South Australia. Later coronial findings linked him to the abduction and killing of 7-year-old Linda Stillwell. His record brought several features of Wanda into view. Percy targeted children, and at least one proven attack took place on a beach. He had traveled. Investigators believed he could have been near Cronulla when Marianne and Christine were killed, and in 1965 he was young enough to fall within the broad age range described by witnesses. A new reason to question him appeared in 2007, when police learned of 35 boxes stored in Melbourne. They contained diaries, drawings, sexual material, and other documents associated with Percy. Among the reported discoveries was a torn cartoon or note bearing the handwritten word Wanda. Police obtained permission to question him again about Wanda Beach, the Beaumont children, and several other unsolved cases. The handwritten word drew immediate attention because it came from Percy's own stored material. But the boxes were assembled after the Wanda murders had become known across Australia, and he could have encountered the name in newspapers, television, or years of public discussion. The material revealed an interest. It did not record his movements on January 11, 1965. Further questioning produced no admission. The boxes contained neither a Wanda weapon nor a verifiable detail that only the offender should have known, and the surviving forensic work produced no usable match. Percy died of cancer in 2013 without leaving investigators a statement or exhibit that could be tested against the original scene. Christopher Wilder's connection began earlier than either of those theories. Before the Wanda murders, not years afterward, he had already been convicted of a sexual offense against a young teenager. His age, his home in Sydney's northwest, and the methods seen in his later crimes brought him closer to the girl's world than most of the other known names. Wilder was 19 in January 1965. He lived in Sydney's northwest, near the district where Marianne and Christine lived, and knew Sydney's beaches. 2 years before the murders, he had been convicted over the sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl in the Manly area. That offense established predatory behavior toward a young teenager before Wanda. The witness description also fits him in broad terms. Wilder was young, tanned, and associated with surfing and beach culture. Photographs from the period have been placed beside the police image. Later in life, he repeatedly approached young women and girls, often using charm, photography, or promises of modeling work to gain trust before the encounters turned violent. After moving to the United States, Wilder became a violent serial predator. In 1982, while visiting Australia, he was charged with sexual offenses involving 2 15-year-old girls. He returned to the United States. In 1984, during a cross-country series of abductions and murders, he was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. He died from gunshot wounds during a struggle with police in New Hampshire that April. By then, Wilder's record had established 2 facts relevant to Wanda. He had targeted a young teenage girl before 1965, and later he repeatedly turned ordinary public encounters into opportunities for control. His whereabouts on January 11, 1965, remained absent from the public file. Public attention returned to Wilder through television investigations in 2018 and 2020. In 2025, retired Detective Inspector Ian Watterson, who had reviewed the cold case, named him publicly as a major person of interest, citing the violence he was capable of and his pattern of preying on young girls. Journalists examining Wilder in 2026 added accounts from people who said he had approached teenage girls around West Ryde before the murders. One woman reportedly recalled that Wilder repeatedly tried to persuade her to go with him to Wanda Beach. Another line of inquiry concerned a little black book said to contain names of girls he had contacted. Those recollections would matter most if they can be anchored to a date, an original statement, or an independent witness. Verified, they would connect Wilder with the victim's age group, their local shopping area, and Wanda itself. No published account shows that this verification has been completed, and New South Wales Police still describe the case as open. Nor has public reporting produced a reliable sighting of Wilder on the train, at Cronulla, or in the dunes. The composite resemblance is broad. No Wanda witness described the photography or vehicle ruses seen in his later crimes, and the disclosed DNA work connects him to neither the recorded semen evidence nor the weak male profile. For Wilder to move from a persuasive historical suspect to a provable one, the file still needs a point of contact from January 11, a sighting, a work or travel record, a weapon, or a genetic result. His known history reaches close to the root. It has not reached Marianne and Christine. Even Malott arrived much later in the Wanda discussion, through a photograph. Malott was convicted of murdering 7 backpackers, and investigators have long suspected that his offending extended beyond the crimes proved at trial. In 2025, a New South Wales parliamentarian placed an early photograph of Malott beside the Wanda identikit and urged closer examination of his possible involvement in older cases. The resemblance drew attention, as did Malott's later use of isolated outdoor locations. The comparison went no farther. No known forensic result connects him to Marianne or Christine, and no record places him on their train route, at Cronulla or in the dunes that day. Police examined other men as well, including convicted offenders, and people said to have made admissions years later. One reportedly told a partner that he had committed the Wanda murders, then dismissed the statement as a joke. Detectives checked claims like that against movements, injuries, clothing, and details withheld from the public. This account produced no disclosed fact that could only have come from the crime scene. Investigators also considered whether the Wanda offender had killed again. In early 1966, the unsolved murders of Wilhelmina Kruger in Wollongong and Anna Dowling-Koa near Menai were examined for possible links. Both women were sexually attacked and killed with extreme violence, and contemporary detectives compared the cases with Wanda. The comparison followed Haynes's warning that the murderer might strike again, but the victims, settings, and circumstances differed. Kruger was a middle-aged cleaner attacked around a commercial building before dawn. Dowling-Koa was an adult woman whose body was found beside a road after she disappeared from King's Cross. The violence justified comparison. No physical evidence or charge joined the 3 files. By the time the original inquiry slowed, police had reconstructed the route, gathered witness statements, documented the scene, and worked through a vast suspect pool. Biological material had also been preserved. The missing step was one that 1965 science could not provide, turning a stain into the identity of a single person. Decades later, preserved clothing returned the inquiry to the biological evidence. The cold case was reopened more than once. Work that included the New South Wales Cold Case Justice Project from 2007 sent investigators back through archived forensic holdings and returned preserved clothing to the laboratory. In 2012, police announced that a bloodstain on Christine's clothing had yielded a weak male DNA profile. At first, the announcement sounded close to the answer Haynes had expected. The laboratory had recovered male genetic material, but the profile was too weak for an identification or a prosecution, and its source remained uncertain. The result could not show when the blood reached the clothing, or whether it came from the attacker, another person, or later handling. A fuller profile might have separated those possibilities. The surviving fragment was too limited. The search then moved backward to pathology material retained from 1965. Records indicated that a semen sample from Marianne's swimming costumes had once been kept. Because it was associated with the sexual attack, That sample could have offered a more direct comparison with the offender than a faint blood trace of uncertain origin. Police and forensic staff worked through years of stored slides and samples. Several items were recovered. The recorded semen sample was not among them. By 2014, its loss had been publicly acknowledged. Later reviews found other stains, including material on Christine's shorts, but the remaining samples were too degraded for a decisive result. The case had passed from one forensic era into another. In 1965, investigators could preserve the biological evidence but could not turn it into a genetic identity. By the time DNA testing made that possible, the sample with the clearest connection to the sexual attack was no longer in storage. No public record explains exactly how the slide disappeared. Laboratories moved, labels changed, and retention rules changed across the intervening decades. An exhibit could be returned, destroyed, or filed under a system never designed for tests that did not yet exist. Whatever happened, the recorded sample can no longer be compared with Wilder, Percy, Bassett, Milot, or an unknown man. A full offender profile might have allowed comparisons through relatives, genetic genealogy, or the elimination of names that have remained under suspicion for years. Without the slide, those paths are blocked before the laboratory can test them. Other work is still possible. Newer methods may recover more from the degraded stains that remain. Investigators can return to laboratory notes, evidence photographs, and chain of custody records, then set the original witness statements beside employment records, vehicles, travel, and later offending histories. Every one of those checks is harder now. Many original witnesses and investigators have died. Repeated coverage has altered memories, the dunes have changed, and the men who might once have been confronted with fresh evidence are gone. The beach also offered anonymity. A man could arrive by train, bus, or car, mingle with swimmers and families, then enter the dunes without attracting attention. He might have noticed the girls that day, spoken to Christine during her brief absence, or followed the party from the rocks. Another possibility is harder to measure. The girls may have recognized him well enough to approach without alarm. 4 younger children were still waiting nearby. Their presence increased the attacker's risk and may also have affected how Marianne and Christine responded if they sensed danger. Whoever approached them gained enough control or enough trust to reach the cover of the dunes without the children seeing an open struggle. The sequence suggested by the evidence is brief and violent. The girls walk north. One looks behind. They enter a place where the ridges block sight and sound. The offender gains control. Marianne is attacked with the knife. Christine runs. Her path is marked in the sand for 34 meters. She is struck, stabbed, and dragged back. The attacker disturbs their clothing and leaves biological material. He covers the bodies incompletely and leaves without being identified. The record becomes less certain beyond that point. Wolfgang's young Surfy has never been identified. Nothing proves the girls had arranged to meet anyone. Christine's alcohol and different food still have no confirmed source, and neither does the blunt weapon. The file does not show how the offender arrived, how he left, or whether another person ever heard him speak about the murders. Without the later names, the route remains clear until the girls disappear from view. The file places Marianne and Christine on the train, at the rocks, beside the waiting children and moving north. It records a young Surfy nearby and one girl looking behind her. It does not place an identified man beside them. The suspects entered through separate pieces of later evidence. Bassett through a painting, Percy through beach offending and the handwritten word Wanda, Milot through a photograph, and Wilder through a pre-1965 sexual conviction and later accounts from Top Ryde. None of those entry points reaches the final stretch of sand. For Wilder, the most heavily reported theory, the missing step is still a dated record, witness or forensic result, from January 11, 1965. Marianne's brother Hans was one of the children left at home while she took the younger siblings to Cronulla. For the rest of his life, the case brought him back to photographs and descriptions of what had been done to her. In 2025, he calculated that Marianne would have been 75 and said simply that it would have been nice if she were still around. Christine's family faced the same violence in a different room. A relative had to identify her at the morgue, and her cousin later said the injuries made that task extremely difficult. A month after the funeral, the cousin's father died of a heart attack. The family connected his death to the strain of the murder. The 4 Schmidt children who traveled home from Cronulla carried the final ordinary hours with them: the wind, the waiting place behind the dune, the untouched purses, and Marianne's promise that she would return. The reward has changed little while the case has aged. The original offer of £10,000 later became $20,000, and according to New South Wales police statements reported at the 60th anniversary, had never been increased. Hans Schmidt has argued publicly that the amount no longer reflects either the original value or modern reward practice. A larger reward could draw out someone who heard an old admission, kept a photograph, or found papers after a relative's death. It cannot restore the missing sample or the first unaltered memories of witnesses. What it might produce is one new name, vehicle, photograph, or conversation for detectives to test. The recent Wilder reporting could still yield that kind of lead. Accounts from women who were teenagers in 1965 may help establish whether he was approaching girls near the victim's neighborhood at the right time. A dated photograph, work record, or credible sighting on the train or beach would add what resemblance and later criminal history have never supplied: a point on the route. Any memory offered now would have to be checked against an original statement, a firm date, or another witness. Journalists can bring an account forward. Police must set it against the archived file. As of 2026, no official announcement has identified Christopher Wilder as the Wanda Beach murderer. Wilder may be the strongest known suspect, or a dangerous man whose life overlaps several features of a crime he did not commit. The evidence that could separate those possibilities may once have been preserved on a glass slide. After every modern review, the same absences remain in the file. No reliable witness identified the offender at the scene. Neither weapon was tied to a suspect. The surviving male DNA is too weak or degraded for a conclusive match, and the recorded semen sample with the greatest potential cannot be found. The original inquiry nevertheless recovered much of the day. Detectives found the last independent sighting, documented the pursuit in the sand, interviewed thousands of people, and kept clothing long enough for later testing. They never found one link strong enough to carry a suspect's name from the file into court. The route is still visible in the record. At 8 in the morning, 6 young people leave West Ryde. They change trains at Redfern and reach Cronulla. Wind closes the beach. The group shelters by the rocks. Christine steps away and returns. A young man is seen nearby. The children walk into the dunes. 4 of them stop. Marianne and Christine continue north. 1 girl looks behind her. Hours later, 4 children collect the untouched purses and go home alone. The next morning, a stranger sees what he thinks is a mannequin in the sand. From there, the trail runs for 34 meters and stops beside 2 bodies. Police carried it outward through 7,000 interviews, composite drawings, suspect files, stored boxes, old clothing, and laboratory slides. The inquiry reached some of Australia's most violent known offenders, then a weak male profile and a missing sample. It never reached a name that could be proved. Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock were 15 years old. They were friends, neighbors, and the 2 older girls trusted to take 4 children to the beach and bring them home. The children came home. Marianne and Christine did not. More than 60 years later, the Wanda Beach murders are still open because the sand preserved the shape of the chase. But the evidence system lost the clearest chance to identify the person responsible.